So I have the pleasure this early evening here in Grand Rapids at the Amway Hotel, sitting across from. I always want to say Mikhail.
Mikhail.
Mikhail? Okay. It's that KH that really throws me because it's like the sounds of it make me want to go a couple of different ways with it.
Mikhail, I hear it all. Mikhail.
What is the worst one you've heard?
Mikhail.
It's hailing Mikas out there.
Mikas Hales. Michaels. Yeah.
Well,
Andrew Mikhail.
Since last time you were on, though, you've actually now have the Serpents record out.
Yes.
How is it to finally unleash this beast of a record?
How is it?
Yeah.
Honestly, see, you're seeing me on a lighter day. It just came out on April 26th. What is it, May 14th at the moment?
Yep.
So I'm very much alleviated from the stress of that record and the pressure of releasing it DIY. So it feels great. It's being received very well from the people who have taken the time to hear it, and that's all I really wanted.
Well, it was kind of interesting the last time we talked, and I think it's kind of apropos, even though we're in the middle of the month. You know, May is now nationally known as a Mental Health Awareness Month, and I know that you had kind of talked about a lot of the mental aspects of making this record, and you didn't want to reveal too much because I think you wanted people to not be so inundated by what you say you went through and just let them experience the record as they're going to. So now that the record is out and people have kind of had a chance to listen to it, what was some of the stuff that you went through in writing this record that you didn't really necessarily talk about last time?
Well, I mean, it's hard to remember exactly what we talked about, but the big thing was it's a journey. You know, it's the story, or the album itself. You know, it's called Temet Nosce. It's Latin for Know Thyself. You know, we've talked about this, I believe. To the point that I lived out this storyline. You know, we're in Grand Rapids. That's where it all happened. You know, there's about 6 parallel storylines. We talked about that in the last episode, if you guys haven't heard it. But, you know, well, like...
What was that?
What was the question?
Oh,
Sorry.
No, just basically, you know, talking about some of the actual, because I know something you had said in the last interview was just, you know, that you went into some really dark places just due to getting into the character of the record and the things that you were writing about. And so it just kind of made me wonder, like I said, you know, we're in May. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and just kind of speaking a little bit more to those experiences. Now that the record, you know, now that you're done and a lot of the pressure of like an album release and all that kind of stuff is kind of off of you, if some of those things have kind of gone away or if they're still kind of omnipresent, because it's not something necessarily that is a character that you slip in and out of, but is a real life part of your life.
Well, I mean, the character in the actual album storyline goes through the motions. So, you know, all of that is on the record. As far as a piece of me, that character, so to speak, from the album has died. Like that was a chapter in my life. You know, a big thing in the occult, I guess you could say, teachings is, you know, you die 1,000 deaths. You know, each day or if you're doing it right, you're, you know, a brand new person, essentially. You distill yourself, right? Funny being in Beer City, you know. But, you know, a lot of those aspects are always going to be me. You know, I'm always going to be my own worst critic, perfectionist, little bit of a, you know, hothead. You know, delusions of grandeur. You have it all. But, you know, those are always going to be there, and they always keep me going to the next album and the next album and the next album. But this particular storyline, where I lived it out in Grand Rapids, that's dead. Like, that person's dead.
Coming back here, is this the first time you've been back since you recorded the record? Was there any residual feelings when you came back? You was like, or is it all gone?
You know, part of the, you know, I don't think I talked about this on the last interview, but, you know, one of my only, I mean, you know, I made a lot of friends in Grand Rapids and a lot of enemies in Grand Rapids. But one of my, I guess you could say, closest friends, you know, died while I was here due to heroin overdose. So when I came back and I'm seeing all the old spots, all the old haunts, I was over at Bob's Bar, where I would sit and write, lyrics. I would write lyrics at Meanwhile Bar. And these are like, for the people who are listening, these are like pretty divey, punk bars. Yeah. And, I would be the weirdo in all black, just with a notebook, drinking alone. And, taking my brain back to those nights, being alone and kind of doing the band thing, kind of triggered it. Oh, remember her, breaking up with your girlfriend and all that stuff. And so kind of seeing the sights kind of triggered those emotions. But, I'm with good people right now while we're here to kind of advert those thoughts. And I really wanted to appreciate Grand Rapids again for what it really is. It's a beautiful city.
I think it's also kind of fitting that, we were talking about this before recording, but Grand Rapids is going through a huge growth right now. I think you even kind of commented the fact that a lot of it is changing. So a lot of those kind of seedy parts are starting to go away, which, having lived here now, probably almost going on, I think 15 years roughly, myself, it's one of those where sometimes I don't know if I like the fact that, the city is kind of growing and more people are coming in and all these awesome things are starting to pop up into my town, or if I kind of miss the fact that, because I've lost friends that live here too, and some of the places and things that we used to go do are not available anymore, and they're starting to go away. And it's kind of weird because I think as you get older, you kind of realize that, like, I guess that the tangible thing may go away, but the memories associated aren't. So it's kind of been weird for me to see some of these places, like you're saying, some of these haunts even going away, but realizing that doesn't take away the memory of the people that you love and have lost. And almost very much like the city itself, it's almost a rebirth of sorts that you kind of get to go through as well. And it's kind of interesting to think about that. Music does that for me as well. And I've never really thought about how, I guess, that applies to you from your perspective of, writing an album or, being in a touring band or whatever, where, like, you can look at these places and go city by city and be like, oh, I have memories, good, bad, or indifferent of each thing. What, you were in Saugatuck of all places. How was that for you out there?
So for those listening, Saugatuck is a nice little, I would say, beach town, right? Very extremely quiet. We spent. Quiet. I love it. Like, since the last time we talked, I think I was in Austin. I was living in Texas at the moment. I moved back since that interview. I moved back to Chicago, proper Chicago, and then I left Chicago because it was a little too busy for me, and the gentrification is real over there. So I moved out to the rural part in Illinois, and man, like, even where I'm living right now, it's being like, there's like projects being built. Like, I'm not saying like projects, but you know what I'm saying, like new developments. Yeah. So even that's happening where I'm living. So even where it's supposed to be quiet, that's happening. So going to Saugatuck, nothing's really changed over there so far that I know. Still quiet, still everything's closed. So, when a lot of people found out I was coming out to Michigan just for kind of like a post, album release shows, getaway, I just wanted to go back to where it all started, and also go back to Saugatuck, where it's just kind of like, I know it's going to be the way I left it. And that's what it was.
Kind of speaking to the shows themselves, I'm not going to give you my thoughts on one of the venues you played, because I'm not a fan of the person that booked a show there once. Okay. But with all that said, I think these are the first shows you've done in quite a while.
Yeah, these are the first shows Serpents did in about 7 years. Yeah. Even then, like, when I think of Nashville, like, I used to think, like, that's where Serpents, as well as a touring band, that's where it died. That's a whole chapter. But as far as myself, last tour I did was Japan with Defiler and Aggressive Dogs, and that was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago.
How hard was it to sort of resurrect Serpents, because I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think any of the guys are the same.
No.
So how hard is it to, especially this record with, all that went into it, how hard was it to find people to perform these songs and the songs that make up Serpents, but more so the newer stuff at the level that I think you would need it to be at or would expect out of it?
To be honest with you, it was extremely hard. In our age range, it's difficult to want to pursue music if you're not already deeply embedded in it. So that aside, you have guys with full-time jobs. My drummer has kids. Thankfully, the guys I got, they're willing and, very extremely talented to the point that, it was difficult to find them, and it was also difficult to convince them to, go all in on such a venture that's, starting from scratch, essentially, all over again. And then also you have to consider, Serpents is kind of like a ideology, or it's kind of like a hive mind, so to speak. So it's hard to find people on the same wavelength. Because let's say I could find an amazing bass player, but if he's like hardcore Christian, that's not going to work out. Essentially, and I don't want to cheat the people watching us. I don't want them to think like anything of this is like a lie. So that was difficult. Trying to find guys in the area, that's another whole ordeal. My current band, I got guys, one's in Indiana, one's in proper Chicago, one's in like Peoria, and I'm all the way over in kind of like, rural part west Illinois. So it is very difficult these days compared to, when, let's say, Facebook just would show everybody your posts.
It was kind of interesting in seeing some of the stuff you've been posting lately. I was kind of surprised to see, I don't know if invested is the word I want to use. I guess something that I find interesting is, I'm going to compare you to a local band, but not the fact that you are, but just thinking in the approach. So a lot of times you see local bands and they seemingly have an excuse for everything. Scene doesn't support us. Other bands don't support us. Venues don't support us. Oh, it costs too much money to have a good record. That's why we don't have things out. This, that, and the other. There just seems to be an endless stream of excuses as to why something can't be done. With your release, I was surprised to see such, like the tarot cards. Like, that was a very adventurous thing to do for a band that basically is brand new again for a lot of people, and to see how much different thought-provoking ways to express your brand as a band, I thought was really interesting, and wondered, in the 7 years or so since you had been a band last, were these ideas that you had been like, when and if this thing gets back up and running, these are things I didn't get to do the first time, so I really want to make sure I get to do some of these ideas I have now. And with that being said, because everything is brand related now, it seems like you were just talking about Facebook. Social media is king. Everyone needs to be on 24/7. So to think of new things that other bands haven't done or beaten to death, how hard is that now?
So that's a very big question.
I know. Sorry.
No, you're. So in reference to branding, when the album was finished, and it was time to start really, really hammering on the album and like start promoting it, we started working with some publicists, and their big thing was, you need to make an Instagram. You need to do this. All great advice, but something I honestly could care less about. I don't want to be a brand, but it's a reality these days. Everybody's, doing something that's kind of their thing. So even like our Instagram, it has a vibe, right? Our music obviously has a vibe. Our imagery has a vibe. So that was something like, even me right now, I'm wearing a red tracksuit, Adidas tracksuit, like black metal, like true black metal, whatever. They would probably say
You have a behemoth shirt on underneath that. I think
know,
that kind of it's
but
like the Superman thing when you pull it open. There's your
but
real
it's
colors.
white or it's cream colored, so that's like sacrilegious. I don't know. I honestly don't care about it. But to play ball, I still do it. Now, as far as back then, so 7 years ago, we were working with some other companies, like management companies and booking agents. They had a different idea than I had for this whole thing, right? I honestly never wanted to show myself or members anything. I just wanted the logo and like just the music. I wanted the music to speak for itself. They convinced me, hey, you need faces, you need this, da 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 da. Okay, so we did it. As far as like merch, I'm not very proud of the merch we did 7 years ago. It's really not my vibe, if that makes any sense. So now, 7 years later, however many years later, it's a departure from the mainstream. Everybody's kind of in their own lane. So I took care of everything, the creative control of artistic control or everything. So the tarot cards, it was my idea because it coincides with the album storyline. A lot of people really dig the vitriol bottles, the little oil bottles that I sent out. That was kind of like a collaboration with our publicist, but he had a completely different idea, right? But I was like, well, I want to make it my own. I want to make it Serpents related. What is the message? Same thing with the tarot cards. You should honestly see like the list of things. We had ideas to promote the album. There was stuff you have never seen before, and it probably still is going to happen. But I just try and keep things fresh. I like to keep things relevant and cool, I guess.
How, kind of piggybacking off of the question and kind of what you're saying, something that I was thinking of as you were talking about that is like you say you have more ideas and things to do for promotional outlets for the record and so forth, and it makes me wonder, something else I see a lot of people do is if they can't execute the plan exactly the way it should be or needs to be, they take the cheap route to just so they can do it. Excuse me. And it doesn't seem like, obviously, like, for those who are listening, go check out, I think I saw them on the Instagram page. You guys posted the tarot card thing. So go to the Instagram page and go check them out. And you can see that it's not like they're just bullshit tarot cards. You can tell a lot of care and detail was made when making them, and that they're a quality product in and unto themselves. So kind of, the question then becomes, would you ever, it doesn't seem like you would sacrifice the quality of something because it then directly comes back to you as a band and a brand. Safe to say?
Yeah, all the way up until now, I've been working just jobs just to pay for the album and the merch and stuff. This whole endeavor wasn't cheap at all. Like, if you look at Serpents merch, it's, American Apparel, tarot cards. I worked with this guy, Mark, from Armenia. We literally went, I guess, like maybe 2 months back and forth on making this the right way. Even the glass bottles, like shipping those was difficult. The vinyl posters that we made for the album, I really didn't. I wanted it to be an experience, essentially. Yeah. If that sums it all up, I didn't want somebody to open the package and it's like, okay, same pre-orders everybody else gets, and stickers. Thank you very much. I surprised everybody. I don't know if you saw that, but with certificates of authenticity, with actual guitar strings that I used while recording the record, along with picks, those vitriol bottles. So it cost me in the grand scheme of things thousands and thousands of my own money, which people like Devin Townsend these days, like he just released his album and he spent a lot of money, and I kind of shared the same sentiment. It's like, if you guys don't like this one, man, I don't know what I could do for you for the next one. It's I thought I saw he posted like, if I'm done after this if nobody cares, but honestly, it's very difficult to be making these orders for, let's say tarot cards, and I'm just like, what if nobody buys these?
Yeah.
Like, then I'm out of all this money. But it's mainly an experience for the listener and to make it special.
Well, I mean, it's funny, the timing of us talking about this and just the money spent to get your brand awareness, get your stuff out there. I've been wanting to do merch, kind of various ideas as well. But the unfortunate thing is, and a lot of people don't seem to know, is I worked for a screen printing company here before I quit to focus on the podcast more. And even if I were to, even at my cost of doing it, which I can still go back there and I can still print stuff, it still is going to run me a couple $100s to run, a very limited run of merch. And too often you see people buy things and then it's like you just sit on it and it's like, well, what the fuck? Like, now I'm sitting on this shit for a year. It does me no good. So, I don't know if this cheapened my presentation of things, but I opened up I don't know if it's TeePublic or whatever the fuck the website's called.
Depop?
I probably should know.
Depop or whatever it is.
Huh?
The Depop?
No, I'm not selling my clothes.
Oh.
That would be if you wanted to sell that tracksuit, you would be like, hey, go on my Depop and you can buy my tracksuit.
Check it out.
No, I think it's teespring.com, I think is what it is, or Spring Tea or something like that.
Okay.
But they basically, you put a design on something and then you can pick the colors, the styles, and all that kind of stuff. And, I have phone cases, I have socks, I have tote bags, a bunch of bullshit that probably no one will ever fucking buy. But the thing is it costs me nothing. They make everything per order, which is tight. And then, in essence, you get a shirt, you get leggings. I bought my wife a pair of leggings with the podcast logo on them, see how they are. And a lot of women were like, oh, well, if these are halfway decent, I'll buy them. But, I mean, to go and make leggings, I'm going to be straight up honest. The cost, break even, for, them to make it is, almost $30. I'm selling them for $40 because I figure that's pretty reasonable. If you were to go to a show and buy leggings, they're about $40. My wife bought Cradle of Filth leggings, and I think that's how much they were. And it's one of those things that, a lot of people I don't think realize the business aspect of being in a band or being in anything creative, to where you're constantly, all you wanted to do was just the thing that made you happy, that sparks creativity, that sparks inspiration. And then at some point, because you got to start offsetting the in potentially in a band situation, massive costs in creating this thing, then it gets to this tricky thing where now all of a sudden you're a business person and a marketing person and a salesperson, and you then become a almost a business in sense of having to sell things. And it's just kind of a trip. When even, thankfully, I come from the retail world, so I kind of am all about margins and analytics and so forth. So to me, it's I look at the number I'm getting back when I was setting the prices on things, I'm that's not a bad cost. I mean, it's a little bit much for what you're getting, but I'm not making that much more. But I already was at the thing of doing that. It's okay, if I can generate blank amount of money, what I'm going to do is then reinvest that, and I'm going to go back to my job and print the shirts, and then I can sell them cheaper and then keep the ball rolling. But for now, this is a thing I have to do to just try to generate some money in a completely different realm other than, hey, if you want to donate to my PayPal or whatever. And I don't think a lot of people understand the hustle that goes into creating something in a creative format, because it is, I wanted to do this and I have fun doing this, but now I'm getting to the point now where it's the amount of fucking time I put into it between editing, doing interviews, emails, traveling for interviews and so forth, it gets pretty expensive. And it just gets to the point where I see what you're doing and the quality of the things you're doing, and it kind of is inspiring, but it's also I know you have a big boy job and stuff like that, and I'm not
anymore.
Well, exactly.
Sure.
But it was one of those that I saw what you were doing in order to achieve something that meant more to you. You're willing to sacrifice, maybe the job that you really want, which is the band thing, and going and working a 9-to-5, and maybe working a 9-to-5 that isn't really what you want to do, but it pays better than the other jobs that might be a little more flexible to do, allow you to do Serpents and a job. And it just, I see so many examples of that, and I just wanted to say, hey, thank you for being an inspiration to not shortchange what I do, because I see someone like you who isn't taking the shortcuts in putting out what you are doing. And I think more people should pay attention to those things, because I think that's what separates the bullshit noise that, the things that make the most noise aren't always the best things. So you'll always see kind of the cream rise to the top. So like maybe right now it's not,
fingers crossed.
maybe right now like Serpents isn't, where you want it to be, but I think by not taking any shortcuts, I think that's going to be what allows the success to happen. And when it happens, it's going to be earned. And it's very much how I treat this podcast. Like I feel like things are happening and something's turning the corner. And I know that the reason I got there is because I didn't fucking take any shortcuts. I didn't buy likes. I didn't buy downloads. I didn't buy things. Everything is authentic. Yeah. And I think that's something that's sorely lacking in the world, not just music.
Well,
sorry that was so long-winded.
No, you're good. I mean, the big thing I've noticed personally is that, like you were just saying, the buying the likes and all that stuff, that's almost like industry standard these days. I'm oblivious. I guess I'm old school. I try and do everything organically. The most you'll see me do is like buy Instagram posts or not Instagram posts. Yeah, or a Facebook's whatever. You have to play the game or else you're gonna die. You're gonna die out. Like these algorithms and whatnot, it's gonna phase you out. So that's something you have to consider. When you talk about sacrifice, I can swear, right?
Yeah, you can swear.
Yeah. Every fucking day, I wanted to just drive my car into a wall, working my job. Like, I hated my job. Granted, I was doing things somewhat relevant to,
right,
music. But even then, like, I was working an office job. I was working 2 jobs at one point to move back to Chicago, right, from Austin. Sacrifice, that was a big part of this album. I lived in Grand Rapids. We talked about this in the last podcast. I moved here to literally get into character for the album. Did I know if anyone was going to listen to it? No. Is it the biggest album in the world right now? No. Can I, look back on the past and regret and say, why the hell did I do that? I could have just wrote an album. Sure. But am I doing that? Absolutely not. Because to me, I would rather put something genuine and I guess you could say something that could stand the test of time, rather than, I'm just going to sing a couple songs about my girlfriend and I'm going to murder her, or burning churches and, whatever, forests and winter. Cool, man. Do what you got to do. But for me and Serpents, like, I'm trying to make it, like, a little bit more meaningful. But here's the thing is I guess you could say the climate in our industry, I guess, has diluted the need for that. A lot of people get upset with Serpents or me. Why don't you have more shirts? Why don't you have, more hoodies, booty shorts, stuff like that? I was like, honestly, I'm not confident in, pumping out a lot of designs because I don't know if you've noticed, like, some of the newer designs, like, I personally design them. That's the only corners I'm willing to cut. Is like, well, if I would rather design them myself, that's a little bit more meaningful. Granted, I'm taking a week, maybe even longer to design it. But again, it's more like, hey, it's a little bit more genuine, But back in the day, like in high school, like I had, this is a while ago. I forgot the website, but they would like print anything, like you were saying for your merch.
Yeah.
And we would do that. And then I was like, I would rather just print my own and get it like done professionally, because I feel like, somebody going to the show, buying the shirt is a little bit more meaningful for that person. Like, I still have people telling me, oh, I got this shirt from, 04, 03, still in my room. To me, that makes a huge difference. Have I ever seen anybody wear any of the other merch from that store? No. From the store that, they pick their own? Right. No. But, our business is a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
So, granted, like, we're playing shows, selling merch, whatever, but that's what I've noticed. It's just everybody's cranking out stuff just to make money, which is great. Do what you got to do. But since we're in the position we're in right now, I'd rather just take the time and release a shirt here and there, release a hoodie. We did the work shirts. Something that's a little bit more, I guess, special. if that makes sense.
We're not going to see any Serpents tracksuits.
Man, I mean,
I don't know. Talk about starting a gang.
I don't know, man. That's a lot of pressure is, a lot of people, they call us black metal, right? Or death metal, black and deathcore. That was something we used.
Was it you that was posting No, I'm sorry. That was the guys in Violent Life, Violent Death. I guess they got added to a show, and the typical show flyer thing where it describes the band underneath of their logo. Like, God forbid you just go to a show anymore, or do your due diligence on your phone and look up what these bands sound like. But that aside, someone like Joseph, their drummer or guitar player, one of the two, I can't remember off the top of my head, but he posted, "What the fuck is punk infused blackened deathcore," or something like that. And then people were like, "Oh, I think it means this," and it was just really funny to see people get hung up on a term, and even one that wasn't even self-imposed. Like, it was just like, this is what someone described us as. What the fuck is this? Like, none of these go together. I don't even know what this is.
Yeah. So
it's funny to see, like, you're like, oh, we're death metal, blackened death metal core.
Well, I mean, back in the day, like, and I hate to sound dated, I guess, but like my old metal bands, we worshipped bands like In Flames, like back, like old In Flames. Hey, I love In Flames, all In Flames, and I'm actually on record saying that for the old the Oceano Depths DVD. I say the same exact thing. I just dig that kind of music, but we sounded like that, or even like back then we were compared to like Unearthed. Like, this is like before Oncoming Storm came out, but we were playing shows with like Hawthorne Heights, gym class heroes, stuff like that. And like you said, God forbid these days, like, you mix up like a show. We played this past weekend with Mark Rizzo from Soulfly. He's got like a solo thing going on, and the bills were a little bit assorted, let's say, right? Just people, like, we walked on stage with our our wardrobe, our medallions, our scrims, and just people were just like, what the fuck is this? And then the kicker was, we're getting ready to play and we're all decked out, and somebody says, I think Mark Rizzo's playing an acoustic set tonight. And I was like, fuck it, black metal and acoustic, like, whatever. But that's when I started getting away from the genres, because of that, like, mix up. So then I identified Serpents as Dionysian, like the Dionysus. There's it's
the name, the term sounds very familiar. I'm just I don't hear it enough that
I know vocabulary. Nobody has honestly used it, but if you research it, and you'll see there's like two schools of thought when it comes to music, and I just thought, like, hey, this is more kind of like that, instead of sitting there going black and deathcore with symphonic influences. And even in the Oceano days, people go, what the fuck is deathcore? This is back then, and I just kept saying, like, this is death metal with a hardcore mentality. That's it. But the lines are definitely blurred for sure these days.
I guess kind of slowly and winding down a little bit.
Oh, come on.
It's one of those things, like, I'm starting to, like, we were talking earlier, and I was talking about, like, Zealand Ardor, and just the weird cross-pollination of a lot of different styles. I mean, you even look at a band, going, like, to Japan, like, with Boris. You see a lot of these bands.
I love that band.
Yeah, they're so great. And they've played at the Pyramid Scheme a couple of times, and I never have the money to go, and then they sell it, like, instantly.
Was that with Sub Rosa?
I think so.
I was there, I think.
But, you see a lot of these bands that kind of incorporate, like, kind of flirt around with, like, various genres of extreme metal, but then take it in completely more, I don't necessarily want to say pop realms, but just, really stretching the genre of what the word even is, of just taking something and going way left one way and then just running it back and then going another direction with it. And it kind of makes me wonder, we're seeing so much experimentation. Does that maybe inspire you to... Because, I mean, like, looking at what you were doing in Oceano, that wasn't really a normal... Like, deathcore wasn't a thing, really, at the time. When Oceano came out, you were kind of one of the first couple... I would say first 3 or 4. It was, like, Huge Out for a Cowboy...
Suicide Silence, Whitechapel.
Well, yeah.
Impending Doom.
Yeah. And I mean, some people would say Acacia Strain, but I don't think that's really in that. Really,
I mean, I honestly idolized those guys like when I was like younger. So I mean, they're definitely a big influence.
But it's one of those things to see you already having been in a band that kind of was at the forefront of something, and now kind of seeing where that scene has gone, and then kind of seeing where heavy music as a whole has gone. Even kind of being like, seeing like Bring Me the Horizon shirts at H&M. Which, I mean, to see where they started at and where they are now, I mean, I get why they're in a store like that, but they're using, like, old Bring Me logos and shit, like, where they're, like, back in their deathcore days. And it's just kind of, like, now this thing where it's, like, it almost seems like extreme music has become viable from a marketing aspect, which is weird, considering, when we were growing up, like, most of the stuff we were probably listening to was very not mainstream. But I mean, kind of going back to how you were talking about, like, we played shows in Gym Class Heroes and Hawthorne Heights and stuff like that. Like, those kind of shows, I do remember shows like that. Do you see more of the classifications of genres and things slipping away and it just being about the music anymore? Or do you think it's going to get more segregated now because of how much access we have to music now between the various platforms and so forth?
I honestly think that it's going to be more segregated because everybody wants to feel special these days. Everybody wants their own little club. They want their own lane. Back then, I used to get a kick out of, like, let's say, playing with Gym Class Heroes. All of, like, the kids, their fans, whatever you want to call them, they would be mortified when we played. I love that feeling. Back with Oceano days, like, we would play with bands, of the metalcore vein or whatever, or even hardcore, and they would just be like, what the fuck is this? I love that. To me, these days, everybody is struggling. Everybody is reaching for some sort of stability, safety. They're willing to dilute, like you were, kind of hinting towards. So that's why I think that, they're going to be... The sound itself is going to be a little bit more generalized, but the genres will still stay the same, I think. But I think it's going to get worse from here on out. I don't see it kind of blending. Everybody's kind of like sticking to their guns, so to speak. Right. Does that make sense?
Something we've been talking about on the podcast quite a bit lately, and I think it's just a very easy question, but it gets answered differently. Kind of speaking to what we were talking about with the music scene and the music industry and where it's going and trends and so forth, I see a lot of, it seems like, and this is music as a whole, not just metal, rap, whatever, but it seems like, we're kind of going back to that, like, sort of 50s time frame of, like, when it was an A-side, like a 7-inch single, and then you're getting maybe a B-side that's dropping intermittently before that, and then it seems like we're kind of going more EP-based, or then basically after you have 5 or 6 songs out, like, I constantly source Drake as a really great example of this. Drake will just constantly put out single after single after single after single. We'll guest on singles. I mean, if you go up to Detroit and turn on the pop radio station or the hip-hop radio station, you're probably in an hour going to hear 5 Drake songs. 2 of them probably are going to be his. The rest he has a guest feature on. And what's crazy about that is, like, by the time he, like, put out Scorpion, half of that record had already been out as singles. Like, some of them had been singles a year and a half before. Yeah. By the time you're finally getting it on a collection of something, you're kind of already over it. Yep. And so it's been really kind of making me wonder, like, are we going to see it go back to, like I said, the 50s style, like, where it's just single-driven and or EPs? Or is there still a demand for full-lengths?
Well, for those of you who don't know, Serpents so far has only put out full lengths. I've gotten a lot of criticism from the industry. Why are you doing full lengths? Do EPs, or singles. When Temet Nosce was coming out, our publicist was like, "All right, how many singles are we dropping?" I'm like, there's 7, 8 songs on the album. I only wanted to do 1 or 2. Their idea was 4.
That's the new standard now, it seems.
Yeah.
You do the promotional single, the real single, and then you do 2 or 3 more right before the record drops. So basically you're getting half of a record before you even get it.
And then you're not excited.
Nope.
And like, I'm not going to say bands, you know, in particularly, but I've been kind of like privy to that, where I'm like really stoked on an album coming out, and I'm like, every week Spotify's like, hey, new song. I'm like, hell yeah, did the album come out? Oh, it's a single. Okay, I'll listen to the single. Hell yeah, did the album come out? No, it's a single again. And then after the fourth one, I was just like, whatever. And then I find out like, oh, the album came out, and I heard it. And I was like, skip, skip, skip. You know, because I'm like, I want to hear the rest of it. I want to hear the full thing. You know, I feel like that kind of cheats the listener out of that whole experience. And, you know, I mean, I'm not privy, you know, on the insider information, but, you know, I think the hip-hop community is what, you know, started that. And because of the success that they did, you know, doing single, or even pop music, then the metal community is like scratching their head like, let's do that. And it's working. You know, it's working for some bands. But, like, I saw a band, you know, we took 4 or 5 years to work on Temet Nosce, right? A band kind of in our ranks, right? I'm not going to say who they are. Took around the same amount of time. And this is, oh, shit. No, I'm kidding. But, you know, they did about 4 singles on a 7 or 8 song album. And people were pissed because they're like, 3 of these songs are instrumentals. Like, where are the rest of the songs? I waited 5-6 years for this, and that was one thing that scared me releasing this new album. I was like, oh, I don't want to, you know, do that. Now, in terms of strategy, you know, and for the sake of putting out new music, I'm actually pondering the next release from Serpents to be an EP, because I don't want to take 4 or 5 years on the next one. I want to do, you know, something very soon with the rest of the band, because the past 3 albums have been just me. Right. And, you know, I want to work with the band and write a new EP and possibly put that out with a label, hopefully. But, you know, but that's not because of the trend. It's just, I just want people to be fulfilled, you know, versus waiting another 4 or 5 years. Right. And then the whole industry has changed over again, you know.
Well, the interesting thing about it from my perspective, you know, being a vinyl collector, you know, so there are 7 inches, obviously, where you get an A and a B side. You have, you know, 12-inch records, which sometimes, you know, or not 12-inch, I'm sorry. Like, there are other 7 inches that'll kind of be like an EP length, depending on how long your songs are and so forth. And then there's full lengths. You know, something I was kind of in listening to, and I can never fucking pronounce the record name, so forgive me, but the new Serpents record, I'm not even going to try.
Sorry.
But in listening to that, and knowing how long it took, something that I was kind of thinking of that might work for you, and I've proposed this a couple of times to a few other people who kind of seemingly are very album oriented, but I still think it gets it across, because when I say this, I think you'll see how I connected the dots. But I think what Crosses did with their EP collection was really fucking smart. So they, you know, have, I mean, every record was called Crosses, but it was like, you know, this one was 1, 2, and 3, or when they got put on vinyl, blue, pink, and yellow. By the time they released the 3rd EP, though, it was announced, hey, we signed to Sumerian. We're dropping this as all EPs together. The track listing is redone, so it's not in the order that you've gotten to know these songs. And I felt that really gave all the albums. So by the time I got the Crosses record as it was as a whole, because it wasn't in the exact same order I had already had it, it felt completely brand new. And songs that I was like thinking about when I saw the track listing, going like, well, those songs don't even go together because they don't have the same vibe. It was surprising how different of an experience those songs now had for me as a listener. And I'm honestly surprised I don't see a lot of bands, especially metal bands, or bands that take a lot of time and effort into presenting everything in a format like that, or like a concept or whatever. I'm surprised I don't see more people doing that, where it's like, okay, I'm going to give you an EP, and here's the next one, and here's the next one. And it's like, and there's actually a thread between all of them, but I'm going to give it to you the way I really wanted to present it when I release the full length now at this point. But I've been giving you the little pieces to keep you going along. And the other thing that I find interesting about at least doing the EPs, and especially the way Crosses did it, is the fact that even though there's each of the EPs have their own vibe, you kind of were able to see the breadcrumbs kind of left behind of like where other instrumentals or what other songs kind of came from. So it wasn't such a drastic shift. Like if you had just gotten the whole thing and you're like, well, this one doesn't sound anything like these, and things like that. And
like
I think
playlist or something.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the thing. The one thing I do like about the idea of dropping songs kind of intermittently or EPs is if you are starting to change your sound, it doesn't seem as drastic as like my co-host has another podcast called Discography Discussion, and I've been a co-host on it a couple of times. And the thing that's always interesting to me is when you listen to a band's discography, especially if you have a decades-long career, is you, like when I did the one with Fallon on this podcast, I was able to have the hindsight of looking at newest Deftones material. So when we went back and started at Adrenaline, like there was a song where like, yeah, this song kind of sucks, I don't really like it. But then, I remember telling Fallon, I was like, maybe this, now knowing what we know about the Deftones and their career, maybe this is actually a Chino song. We just didn't know then that Chino could play guitar and was writing songs. So maybe this is the first song Chino wrote, and it's not really great, but it made its way onto the record because the band kind of jammed it out and made it what it is. And I go, but it's weird that when you do that and listen to a band's discography all at once, sometimes the subtle shifts are so glaringly obvious when you have everything at your fingertips like that, to where you're like, oh God, what the fuck? Like, you went way too fast on this. But in real time, it doesn't feel that way. It feels pretty subtle. And I think that's what having singles or EPs dropping intermittently will allow you to do, is just, if you're going to explore new territory sonically, it's not going to be such a where the fuck did this come from?
Yeah. Well, kind of touching base on what you were saying, like with old stuff, right? My first, I guess you would say, major release, Depths, Oceano, that was a big step for me. A little bit of a different genre than I wanted to end up playing, as just a listener or a fan of extreme music. But you can tell, where I wanted to go if you listen to With Legions. There's like orchestra in there. So with that, I wanted to leeway into the next album with a little bit more kind of that Dimmu Borgir kind of like, my lady, she makes fun of me all the time because anything with the choir or like huge orchestra, I'm in it. Like I'm done. So, a lot of people, when Serpents first came out, they're like, what is this? This isn't deathcore. Like, people were like honestly expecting me to just come out with another Oceano, and I was just like, that's not what I wanted to do. If anything, if you really want to trace the steps where I started flexing the muscle, I guess, in the studio, was With Legions from Oceano. Now, even the Serpents, the first album, is a little bit more, I'm going to use Bruce Dickinson's term, Jurassic. It's a little bit more primal. Still symphonic, whatever. My vocals were not, as trained as they are now, I guess. All the way to Temet Nosce, where, I'm not singing on this album, but there's like a clean choir singing part, right, which I vowed never to do back then. There's long, droney kind of songs. There's honestly, I can't explain it. Like, it's different than the first album. It's different than the second album. But I always love to trace those steps. Now, that's the thing that scares me about doing the EP after EP after EP, because I change a little bit here and there, but it's not going to be drastic. But, people, I honestly think, like, for us being younger, like, it's easy to think, like, oh, just do EPs and then kind of blend them in as, like, a full experience. But then you have kind of, like, the older metalheads, the people who aren't, like, privy, they just kind of get confused. It happens with me, even with the Crosses albums. Like, I was like, hell yeah, this EP is awesome, But then I saw, new full-length album. I was like, wait, like, oh, I don't have to listen to this because I already dig the EPs. Right. And then I found out I missed out on all these other tracks. So I just think it will get confusing if every band starts doing stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just been interesting to kind of talk about it. And I mean, like I was kind of saying to you earlier, and like I've been trying to make more adamant on the podcast, is like, I don't work for anybody. I've never worked at a label, never worked for any of that kind of shit. It just, I look at music as a whole, as a fan, and growing up in a family that grew up liking music. I am a product of MTV and being, I think, it's kind of the funny thing, like, in talking with my wife, I got put in, like, MTV was just always on, so I might walk into the living room and, MTV Raps is on. And I'm learning about, NWA or, like, Rakim or Eric B. and stuff like that for an hour and a half. To then, here's 120 minutes, and it's more documentary-based kind of shit. And then here's, Headbangers Ball and anything and everything in between. So it's like I have a wide array of musical knowledge. And I'm not saying I'm, like, super deep in any one thing. I think I kind of just touch, whatever was popular at that point. But, it was kind of interesting in talking to my wife, like, when Straight Outta Compton came out, the movie. And, the Rodney King riots were happening. And the things that happened to NWA as a result of their music. And during the movie, she was like, did that happen? And I was like, yeah, you don't remember this? Like, it was all over the news. Not just MTV, but it was all over the news. And she was like, oh, we really didn't have TV. And we didn't really have MTV, especially. And I was like, oh. And, like, to me, that explains, like, this almost like, it's almost like a 10-year gap of music that, like, I know that she has no real frame of reference for. But I also don't know if, like, part of that is the fact that I grew up on the East Coast, too, around that same time. So, like, culturally, like, living here in the Midwest, like, I think you spent time here. I think you can kind of admit that, like, the Midwest is a little bit behind on trends and so forth.
I mean,
not anymore with the internet being what it is, but I'm saying, like, pre-internet, like, really pre-internet.
Yeah.
All you had is whatever you had access to. And especially music, like, if you couldn't get something or if you didn't have people in the know, like, you wouldn't know about shit. But it's like, I remember coming out here and, as stupid as it sounds, growing up in the East Coast, I was wearing, like, I remember moving out here and wearing a Washington Redskins shirt. And people were like, what the fuck is that faggot team? And I'm like, what? And I'm like, it's the Redskins. Or, like, I'm wearing, like, an Eagles shirt and everyone's making fun of me for wearing all these East Coast teams. And I'm like, I'm sorry, there's no way for us to get a Michigan starter jacket.
Yeah.
Like, so you're going to rag on my Washington Redskins one? Okay. And it's just really weird to think about a time like that where we were segregated by where we lived and cut off geographically, whereas now you can have access to anything, and we almost seem to be kind of dumber as a result of it at times.
I think it was nicer, to be like, not to sound dated. I just feel like moving, like, being on tour and going to different, East Coast, West Coast, whatever you want to call it, wherever, different territories. It had their own thing. Yeah. And granted, still does. Yeah. Each place has their quirks. But I really miss that, like, oh, you want, a little bit of the tougher kind of whatever, you go to East Coast. You want the more, I'm not going to go into details, but you know what I'm saying? Like, that's something, that charm, I think is fading due to, a lot of cross-pollination, which is fine. I don't, it's, as long as people are happy and living their lives, not in chains, cool. I'm down with that. Be happy. Do what you got to do. Just don't tell me how I need to live. That's all I care about. But even then, like, back in the day, like, I would go to school and, I would have all these badass, fresh, band shirts that no one has ever seen or heard of, or, like, even that one Cradle of Filth shirt back in the day, before it was, like, everywhere, like the Jesus is a cunt one, stuff like that. Like, I used to have to go to, like, your specialty shop, like a head shop, probably. No, like, there was Metal Haven in Chicago, Earwax Records, like, there was, like, those like, hey, you want the good stuff? You got to come here. Right. And I feel like with the internet, like you're kind of saying, like, everything's accessible. So that it's kind of lost its
luster.
Yeah.
Or special. It's lost its specialness, I guess.
Yeah.
When you finally got the thing, like, I remember, I guess this is still a thing, but, I remember when getting a bootleg CD of, like, a band. Like, if they didn't
VHS.
Yeah.
And I loved it.
And it's one of those things that, like, it's kind of a lot of times it was jank as fuck, like the audio quality or the visual quality, but you had to try to get stuff if you were really a fan of something. And I feel like that's kind of why I think I really asked the EP versus full length thing, because I think it speaks to the fandom of where people are now. Like, are you willing to take in a full length and really sit with it and really take it all in, especially on vinyl? Like, there's it's an immersive experience. I mean, you have to literally get up, and depending on how long of a record it is, you got to flip it over, you got to put it on, you got to sit back down, follow along with it. It's an experience from start to finish. And as someone who is older, I think that's why I do like listening to vinyl. And I also like, when getting friends together, like kind of creating a vibe. Like if there's a vibe in the room when we have people over, the vibe kind of went from being a little more like serious to like really lighthearted all of a sudden. I'm gonna play something poppy, something dancey, or if like conversations aren't happening, I might play something old school to kind of get people like talking about, when this record came out, or when this
I love
song,
doing that.
and stuff like that. And it's like I love curating an evening based on what people are giving me. And I feel like we have kind of lost that. We've lost the connectivity of sitting down and having conversations about things and sharing experiences and finding the shared experiences we have. And a lot of times music is the very easiest connection into that, like tapping right into that. And I feel like that's kind of where the EP full length thing is kind of going, where it's like people are just digesting a song because it's there and then on to the next, because we're in this playlist culture. But I don't know. I feel like there's more there.
There's a lot of things these days diverting people's attention. And for those of you who are listening, I don't want you to walk away from this podcast, thinking that we're just kind of, hammering on the current. And, I'm very up to date with what's going on right now. Yeah, I don't know. Like I for one, I love curating playlists. Like I love that Spotify, like you can curate a playlist and publish it, and like kind of like what you're saying about the party, right? Like I used to be that guy at the parties or on tour, at the green room, like playing whatever to pump everybody up or have a good time. And the internet gives me the ability to do that on a global scale, which is awesome, and not to mention it showcases a lot of other bands that people wouldn't have heard of. You can follow them, listen to all their albums, whatever. So I don't want people to think that we're ragging on what's happening these days, and we're just having a conversation, which is very rare. People could sit there and go, what the hell's this guy been talking about the past however many minutes? Hey, we're just talking. But as far as the EP thing goes, I'm not opposed to it. I've had people tell me, Temet Nosce is too long. Why do you have two 10-minute songs? That's completely unnecessary.
But look at Periphery. They just dropped their new album, and it opens with a 16-minute song.
Yep. And guess what I did? I listened to the fucking album front to back because I knew what they went through to make that album. They showcased their, I guess you could say, their story, their journey on making that album. I try. It's hard to explain this, but I always try and listen or take something in from the other side. Like I still listen to Temet Nosce pretending to be a listener, like just someone who picked it up. I'm like, where does it take me? Where does the album take me? Some EPs, honestly, they're fucking awesome, and they will take you on that trip. No, short time, whatever. But everyone's telling me, hey man, I got shit to do. I got to answer phone calls at work. I got to drive. I got to do this. I'm like, because obviously my preferred way to take my music is sit down and listen. Like that, which is what I did as a kid, though.
Right.
I would sit in front of my boombox. I think we talked about this in the last podcast. Yeah. Sit in front of my boombox with the CD I just bought that I had pre-ordered, reserved at Sam Goody, Tower, whatever. You get your ticket. It's like I waited 4-6 weeks for this fucking album. I bought it. I sat down. I listened to it, and I was like, whoa. And then same thing. I would always listen to it. Whatever. Same experience. So people telling me like, the album's great. I just haven't gotten around to finishing yet. I'm like, man, you got to listen to it front to back. It's like, I don't have time for that. So it's the EP. I get it. I'm into it. But I just have to do it the right way, to not only keep things current, but also, like we talked about earlier in this podcast, not cheap out. I definitely want to go all in if I'm doing an EP or multiple EPs. So,
what does the rest of 2019 look like for you? Obviously, you played a couple of shows. Are there more shows on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, by the time those of you who are listening to this hear this, we'll have a few shows under our belt. We're booking some. We're just booking. I don't want to just keep playing, because this is self-released. I own my own label. I released the album under the label. We're working with some great people right now, who are doing some awesome things for us on the back end of things. So, everybody's got their 2 cents, but for me, and since this is, my baby, it's like I want to play and I want to create. Everything else can wait. The politics can you guys can handle the politics. I'm handling the music, and I want to perform, because that's what we're here to do, is to perform and to create. So the rest of the year, nothing I could talk about as of yet, but we're going to be performing and creating, essentially. If those of you want to join us, feel free.
And lastly, where can everyone follow you so they can see where the performances or the creations will be?
The performances and creations can be found at weareserpents.com. You guys can follow us on Facebook at We Are Serpents, or facebook.com We Are Serpents, Instagram Serpents Metal. Again, we're not really big on the socials, but we still keep things current and up to date, and the true essence of the band lies in the music, not the socials.
Well, thank you for taking the time and inviting me up into your hotel room and kicking your lady friend out.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
And hopefully we'll see you back around these parts sooner than later.
Yes, and I hope you all enjoyed.